The story opens with our protagonist Alec peacefully fishing without bait. Then, out of nowhere, a mysterious stranger approaches and asks if he'd like to learn the art of magic. Their lessons begin immediately, and before long, Alec succeeds in conjuring fire. However, aiming and controlling it as a projectile remains difficult, so his mentor Eldaz instructs him on how to properly focus. Eldaz instructs him to imagine the sensation of striking his target, and also tells him to picture the friends he'll have one day. Sooner or later, those companions will find themselves in danger, and Alec will need to step in and protect them with his magic. That idea works wonders since Alec strongly desires to shield the ones he loves. So Eldaz tells him to hold on to that feeling while inhaling deeply. At last, Eldaz tells him to open his eyes and let the spell fly, and Alec successfully launches 2 fireballs. Overjoyed, Alec grins ear to ear, and Eldaz commends him for the progress. Alec admits that today's spell was particularly hard since it took most of the day to master, but Eldaz reminds him that ordinary people need an entire month to reach the same level. Alec is pumped to learn a new technique, but Eldaz decides not to push him too far, knowing it could weaken the overall training. To cool off, Eldaz suggests they wind down with more fishing. Alec complains, saying he finds fishing boring and can only think about learning more magic. Trying to ground his eager student, Eldaz tells Alec that he's a gifted mage by nature. Even without someone guiding him, he believes Alec will grow into an exceptional mage, like the river that flows without resistance. Eldaz tells him to let destiny guide the rest. That leaves Alec wondering why Eldaz chose to teach him in the first place. Eldaz seems unsure how to answer, but before he has to, he's saved by catching a fish. And despite being a brilliant magic instructor, Eldaz is hilariously bad at fishing, so Alec steps in to help reel it in. The moment lightens the mood, and they share a laugh before calling it a day. By the following morning, Alec returns to his training. The new magic formula is tougher than the last, but Eldaz encourages him, saying he's more than capable. The days go by with Alec learning a fresh spell each and every day. Still, it's not all study and effort. One day, the two find themselves in a snowy showdown thanks to magic-fueled snowballs. But the peaceful days aren't meant to last forever, and eventually, Eldaz reveals that he'll soon be leaving the capital. Alec feels crushed by the news, knowing this means they'll likely never meet again, and Eldaz clearly feels the same. But even now, Eldaz still has advice to give. He warns Alec that if the opportunity ever comes to join the Imperial Court as a magician, he should turn it down. Alec doesn't understand the reason, but what he truly wants to know is why Eldaz taught him magic in the first place. Eldaz hesitates, emotion showing on his face, but he manages a gentle smile and says it was because Alec's mother helped him long ago, back when she was still alive. Those end up being Eldaz's final words to his student, leaving Alec silent and shaken. Years pass, and Alec, now a grown man, is attending the Royal Academy of Magic. He never forgot the teacher who changed his life, and in his search for answers, he discovers that Eldaz once graduated at the top of his class. He did become a court mage, but for reasons unknown, he was later exiled. Alec realizes now that this is likely the source of the sadness that always lingered in Eldaz's eyes. With this in mind, Alec makes a bold decision. He sets his sights on reforming the structure of the Imperial Court. To repay the debt he owes Eldaz, Alec swears to make a difference, and that begins by becoming a court magician himself. Time skips forward, and Alec has achieved his goal. He's now serving as a court mage, but that changes quickly as Prince Regulus announces Alec's dismissal. Regulus questions whether Alec even understands his own duties. Alec replies that his role is to assist the prince using his magic, but Regulus clearly has something else in mind. He presses further, asking if Alec fulfilled that role during their last mission, but Alec has no answer. The prince explains that he, as a warrior, leads from the front because that's his role, and their shield bearer Ix blocks attacks without hesitation because that's his role, and their mage Lenny uses flame spells to push back monsters because that's her role. But Alec, by contrast, has only ever used buffs and defense spells. Regulus says that's not enough, not for someone carrying the title of of court magician. He questions whether Alec only holds the position in name. Alec admits that he's stuck to support magic so far, but insists there's a valid reason for it. Regulus isn't interested in hearing his side. He interrupts and tells Alec to just admit that all he knows is basic support magic. Then he calls him pitiful for pretending he's more than that, and the others jump in as well. Lenny mocks him, saying he's always warning the team not to go too deep into the dungeon, when really in her eyes, he's just scared. Alec is stunned by the words coming from his former teammates, but Lenny tells him that she was simply keeping quiet until now. It was the king who placed Alec in their group. But they've reached their breaking point. None of them are willing to hold back anymore, and they're tired of dragging someone like Alec along while tackling dangerous dungeons. Regulus says he'd heard Alec was top of his class at the academy, but it's obvious now that he's incapable of doing anything unless someone else steps in to help. Alec begs them to let him explain, but Regulus catches sight of something tucked at Alec's side. It's a dagger, and that alone sets the prince off. He snatches the weapon from Alec and reminds him that he gave a direct order forbidding commoners from carrying arms. Alec tries to explain that he brought it for the next floor of the dungeon because they'll need it, but Regulus has no interest in hearing excuses. He declares that no one on his squad is allowed to take independent action, and he says that this is exactly why he opposed bringing a commoner into his party in the first place, and he regrets not fighting harder against it. Regulus then grabs Alec by the shoulders, tears the official robe off his back, and tells him he doesn't deserve to wear it. He's done arguing, and all Regulus says now is that their team has no place for someone like Alec. So he orders him to leave, and Alec stands there frozen. Later that night, Alec buries himself in study, determined to learn everything he can about the dungeon. He uses magic to flip through multiple books at once, reviewing floor layouts and magical data with precise focus. He compiles a full breakdown of the threats awaiting on the 30th level, and concludes that Regulus's team doesn't have the magical capacity to make it through. His conclusion is based on monster strength, terrain difficulty, and the known failure rates from previous attempts. With their current group setup, Alec is convinced they won't make it out alive. Alec wishes things had turned out differently, and he genuinely tried to be of help, but in the end, he just couldn't earn the prince's trust. Just as he's about to give up, Alec realizes there's still one option left. He knows Regulus won't hear him out, so he decides to approach the king himself. But when he reaches the castle, he's turned away at the gate because he's no longer a court magician, and ordinary citizens aren't allowed inside without official approval. Still, Alec refuses to leave and insists that he carries information too important to ignore. Right at that moment, Lenny shows up to remind Alec that he's been dismissed. She sneers that he's no longer a court magician, just another ordinary commoner. She says she's heard plenty of tales about his supposed brilliance back at the Magic Academy, but seeing him now, she figures those stories must have been lied. One rumor even claimed Alec broke records in the capital's dungeon. Until then, no one had gotten past the 30th floor, but allegedly Alec reached the 68th. Lenny always doubted that story, and now she feels validated. Alec doesn't respond to her jabs and chooses to stay silent because he still has something urgent to deliver to the king. He reminds her that it was the king himself who assigned him to Regulus's team, and that must mean the king trusted him. The message he carries is meant to protect the prince, and Alec believes the king would listen if he just had the chance to pass it on. Lenny returns, seemingly to accept the letter, only to shred it into pieces right in front of him. She says she's done entertaining a commoner's words, then orders the guards to toss his sorry ass out. Later, Alec reflects on how it's been 4 years since graduation, and he tells himself he really did try his hardest as a court magician. Still, he feels the weight of failure and knows he owes Eldas an apology. In the end, he couldn't reform the imperial court like he promised. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls out, and Alec turns to see Yorha, an old friend from the past. It's been 4 years since they last met, but she can tell right away that something's wrong. Alec apologizes for the gloomy mood, and Yorha vents her frustration about the kingdom of Galdana. She says she's sick of how this place clings to outdated ideals about noble blood and social class, and how discrimination still thrives because of that shit. Though she's clearly upset about what he went through, she also admits she's a little glad it happened. She reminds him of what she once said in the past, that one day, she'd get him to join her team, and that's exactly why she came to the capital. Now's her chance, so Yorha asks if he'd like to dive back into dungeons, but this time with his old crew. She tells him she genuinely needs his strength and that she'd be happy to have him by her side again. Alec is taken aback because it's a complete reversal compared to the way Regulus's group treated him. Once a court mage cast out for being dead weight, Alec has been carrying the weight of failure and doubt. But thankfully, Yorha pays no mind to any of that. She sees through his self-doubt and reminds him he's far more than who he believes he is. She tells him she doesn't need anyone else, only him. Her words hit deeper than she realizes, and then she reveals something more. Her party made a pact. One day, they'd all come back for him. She doesn't want to pressure him if he has other plans, but her sincerity has already reached him. Alec agrees to rejoin, and Yorha welcomes him back to their rank squad. Later on the cart, Alec dreams of a conversation from the past when Eldas warned him not to become part of the court. Yorha asks him if he's okay, and Alec just replies that his old mentor had been right about something after all. Back at the palace, Regulus receives word that Alec has left the kingdom and returned to the life of an adventurer, and the group mocks their former companion. The academy once called Alec its most brilliant student, and Regulus had been eager to see how impressive he really was. But after fighting beside him, Regulus concluded he was nothing but a spineless disappointment. Lenny says she's just relieved they won't have to deal with that useless commoner again. Alec's replacement is already lined up, the brilliant son of a noble house named Vogan, and as a true noble, he'll contribute far more than Alec ever could. And with Vogan now on the team, Lenny says they'll tear through the dungeon faster than anyone has before. She boasts that Regulus's name will echo across the world, and they all burst into maniacal laughter. Meanwhile, our protagonist arrives in the dungeon city known as Fizzle. Yorha loves it here because unlike the kingdom, Fizzle doesn't carry the same old bias and class restrictions, so it's been her party's home base for years. But before they can venture into any dungeon, Alec has to officially register as an adventurer. That part is easy enough, but a new obstacle appears. In Fizzle, no adventurer is allowed past floor 30 of any dungeon without a special permit, and that pass is only granted after 2 years of being a guild member. And since Alec just signed up, he doesn't qualify, which means for now they'll have to wait 2 years. The two decide to rest for a bit, and during their break, Yorha explains that her team has already made it down to the 52nd floor of their current dungeon. She wants Alec to be part of that progress, but waiting 2 whole years isn't an option. Instead of fixating on what they can't do, Yorha chooses to focus on what they can. She reminds Alec that lower dungeon levels don't require any passes, and that there should be plenty of places for them to practice. After all, they're adventurers, and in a city built around dungeons, they've got no shortage of opportunities. Soon after, the two are locked in combat on the 2nd floor of one such dungeon. Yorha casts a strengthening spell on Alec, and he quickly cuts down several of the giant wasps surrounding them. But suddenly, Yorha feels uneasy. She had planned for this outing to be an easy warm-up, yet something feels off. She blinks, thinking her eyes might be deceiving her, as the swarm around them multiplies at a shocking rate. But Alec confirms it's no illusion. The insects are furious, and from their behavior, he concludes that their nest has been disturbed. Yorha then conjures a magical barrier to draw the swarm's attention, but Alec urges her not to push ahead. She surprises him, saying she's got this under control. Normally, Alec could handle monsters like these on his own, but Yorha can tell he isn't performing at his best. She knows his potential, yet something seems to be weighing him down, and that's why she tells him to let her handle it for now. It might be tough, but she says helping a comrade in need is exactly what teammates are for. Her words cut deep, stirring something inside Alec. He reminds himself that he's no longer a court magician. He's an adventurer now, just like Eldas once taught him. He repeats to himself that real magic is meant to protect what's precious. Alec clenches his fists and decides he won't hold back any longer. He unleashes an offensive spell, sending bursts of energy that tear through the surrounding wasps. More of the monsters rush in, but Yorha feels stronger this time. With the real Alec fighting by her side, she raises a shield for him to work behind. Just like the old days, Alec chants again, and bolts of lightning crash down from above, obliterating every last wasp in the swarm. Yorha cheers in victory, But her joy fades fast as the ground splits open, and a massive berserk worm bursts out. Alec instantly understands why the swarm had gone wild, but there's no time to dwell on it. The creature lunges, wrapping around Yorha, but Alec already has a plan forming. He knows the spell he needs, though he hesitates. One wrong move could hurt her. He calls out to Yorha, reminding her that she had mastered the finest defensive barrier spells back at the academy. They've always fought in perfect sync, so Yorha immediately catches on to what he's thinking. She fires back with a grin, reminding him that he was once the student with the strongest offensive magic in the entire school. With their trust aligned, Alec unleashes his full power. He chants the name of his attack, Sacrifice Blaze, and releases a torrent of searing flame that engulfs the monstrous worm. Yorha braces behind her barrier as the firestorm consumes their foe, and when the smoke clears, the two stand triumphant amid the ashes. Alec tells her that he always had faith in her, and Yorha smiles, saying he's still the most powerful mage she's ever known. The scene then shifts to a memory from their academy days. Their party is locked in combat with a raging dragon, one fierce enough to wield 5 elemental powers in succession. The fight turns grim, and Yorha is nearly spent after shielding the team from the creature's relentless barrage. Just as the beast prepares to finish them, Alec steps in and obliterates the dragon with a single strike. That moment would go down in history. The day Alec's team conquered floor 68 of the Royal Dungeon. Proving that the legendary story was true, their group erupted in celebration, swearing that they'd stay together no matter what came next. We then cut back to the moment right before graduation, when Alec was part of an elite group of students admired throughout the academy. The team consisted of Ornest, the gifted warrior, Kraja, the sharp-minded healer mage, Yorha, the expert in support magic, and Alec himself, the academy's strongest attack mage. On the day of their graduation, the four had just shattered the academy's long-standing dungeon record, making it all the way to the 68th floor, securing top honors and fame across the entire academy. But as they were walking back together, chatting about their future goals, Alec suddenly came to a stop and told them that he wasn't planning to continue with them because he'd decided to become a court mage instead. His teammates were visibly let down, especially Ornest, who had hoped that with Alec on board, they could have formed the strongest adventure team the world had ever seen. Still, he respected Alec's choice, knowing he must have had his reasons. But before they parted ways, Yorha made one thing clear, that she wasn't giving up, and the moment Alec became available again, she'd be there, waiting to bring him into her party. That brings us back to the present, where Yorha happily welcomes Alec to the team to celebrate. She treats him to a warm meal, but it turns out she doesn't handle alcohol very well, because after a single mug of beer, she's already slurring and barely upright. Within moments, she's out cold, slumped in her seat, so Alec places his jacket over her so she doesn't catch a chill. That's when a man suddenly appears behind him, commenting that Alec seems unusually thoughtful for an adventurer. Assuming he's just a random drunk causing trouble, Alec chooses to ignore him and turns away. But the man doesn't like being brushed off, and he angrily swings his bottle at Alec. The glass shatters, but Alec had already activated a barrier spell, blocking the attack with ease. He prepares to respond, but the man surprises him by calling him by name and saying he lives up to the rumors, then sliding a dungeon permit across the table. He tells Alec to treat it as an apology for such a rude test. Alec, still a bit irritated, now feels more confused than anything. He has no idea who this man is, until Yorha, still groggy from her drunken state, suddenly sits up and asks what the guild master is doing here. Alec freezes in place, realizing the man is none other than the guild master himself. The guild master then calmly tells him that he'd like to see what the former court magician is truly capable of, and invites him to come to the training grounds for a demonstration. Soon, they arrived at the guild's testing chamber, where the man finally introduces himself properly as Leviel Stamp. Alec immediately recalls hearing tales of Leviel's past, and he was once a member of an elite S-rank adventuring team, so Alec knows this fight won't be easy. Still, he's thrilled because he sees this as the perfect opportunity to sharpen his edge before stepping into a real dungeon. As soon as the match starts, Alec opens with a thunderbolt, but Leviel swiftly dodges and retaliates with a slicing water slash. Alec quickly realizes that ranged magic won't work well in this fight, and he'll have to go in close if he wants to stand a chance in this duel. But before he can get close, Leviel activates body enhancement spells, dramatically boosting his speed and strength. He moves so fast that Alec struggles just to follow him with his eyes. And when Leviel finally attacks, Alec manages to throw up a barrier just in time. But even with the shield, the impact sends him crashing into the wall. Yorha flinches in concern, but Alec soon gets back on his feet, assuring everyone he's alright. He admits the speed caught him by surprise, but now that he's experienced it once, he starts thinking of ways to react to it. Then, a grin forms on his face because he remembers that back when he served the prince, he was forbidden from taking initiative in combat. But now, as an adventurer, he has no such restraints, so he's not just limited to dodging and support spells anymore. Channeling his magic into his staff, Alec reshapes it into a glowing blade and charges straight at Leviel. In response, Leviel fires off another water slash, but Alec slices through it with ease, closing the distance. Leviel's impressed, but he doubts Alec will be able to do the same once he starts throwing punches. He strengthens his body even further and darts toward Alec again, but this time, Alec is ready. Just as Leviel gets into striking range, he triggers a hidden thunderbolt spell that explodes right in his face, stunning him long enough for Alec to land a direct strike with magic blade. Leviel stumbles back, genuinely surprised that Alec managed to break through his defense. He finally understands why Yorha always speaks so highly of him, but the test is far from over. With a smirk, Leviel activates the ancient artifact in his possession, and then massive, glowing gauntlets form around both his arms, and one swing from them slams into the floor and leaves a freaking crater behind. Alec instantly understands that taking even one hit from those gauntlets would be catastrophic, so he knows he has to tread carefully. Still, he refuses to back down and casts another thunderbolt spell, but this time the effect barely slows Leviel at all. The artifact Leviel activated has a secondary effect. It gradually regenerates his wounds. That means the longer this fight drags on, the slimmer Alec's chances of winning become. Realizing he has to stop Leviel from healing, Alec keeps up the pressure, launching rapid strikes. But none of his hits are landing because Leviel's speed and movement are too precise. Frustrated, Alec taunts him, asking if he's too afraid to face him head-on. The jab works, and Leviel swings back hard, losing his precision and exposing himself just long enough for Alec to slash him across the stomach. It's the opening Alec was hoping for, so he's finally landed a solid hit, but he knows it'll take far more than that to defeat Leviel. Leviel charges in again, and Alec throws up a barrier, but the punch blasts through it, shattering the shield completely. Even so, the impact slows Leviel down just enough for Alec to drive a spell-boosted strike into his chest. Leviel is not willing to lose, so he slams his fists down with a devastating hammer blow, kicking up a giant cloud of dust that covers the field. Yorha starts to worry that Leviel is going too far for what's supposed to be a test, because that last hit looked like it should have knocked Alec out. But then Alec appears behind Leviel and lands one final blow before his wand breaks, and he collapses. Yorha runs to check on him, and Leviel admits he may have pushed things too far, and he declares Alec the winner. As Yorha starts treating Alec's wounds, Ornist shows up after getting tired of waiting, and is shocked to learn that Alec had just fought Leviel. He tells Leviel it was a bit much to use his strongest weapon in a sparring match, but Leviel says that things got intense, and he lost himself mid-fight. Now that he's seen Alec fight, Leviel is sure he's ready to enter the dungeon and hands over the dungeon pass. The test didn't go how anyone expected, but Ornist still congratulates Alec for passing. Since Alec is still unconscious, they carry him back and let him rest on a couch. By now, everyone knows what Alec went through as a court mage, and the fact that he lasted as long as he did is nothing short of incredible. The palace was packed with snobs who couldn't stand the sight of a commoner in their ranks, so Alec must have fought with everything he had just to hold his ground for this long. Right then, the receptionist bursts into the room, urgently calling for the guild master with some bad news. Leviel quickly tells the group he has to take care of something and asks them to stay behind and look after Alec while he's gone. Before leaving, he warns them not to go any anywhere near his alcohol stash, especially not to touch the rare bottles. The moment Leviel steps out, Ornest casually strolls over to the liquor shelf and grabs the most extravagant-looking bottle he can find, grinning to himself, just to mess with Leviel later. Then, turning serious, he asks Yorha to tell him the full story behind Alec's time as a court mage. Up to this point, he's only heard vague bits and rumors, and what he hears stuns him. Alec's job was to serve as the prince's personal protector, but he was banned from carrying a sword or using any magic that could outshine the prince. He was even ordered to carry supplies and manage the inventory during their travels. And the worst part was that after being forced to rely entirely on support spells, the prince had the nerve to call him useless for not using attack magic. That last detail throws Ornest off, and he always thought Alec specialized in offensive magic. Yorha confirms that's true. Alec specifically went out of his way to learn support spells just to stay on the prince's good side, even though it didn't suit him. Hearing all that, Ornest is furious. The mistreatment Alec endured is far worse than he expected, and the second Alec starts to stir awake, Ornest doesn't hold back, and he tells him they should forget about the dungeon for now and go teach that spoiled prince a lesson he won't forget. But Alec, still groggy, calmly tells Ornest to let it go. He admits it still bothers him, but not to the point of seeking revenge. Ornest offers to go beat the guy up for him, but Alec chuckles and puts a hand on his shoulder. He says there's no need because he's just happy to finally be free, doing what he loves with people he trusts. That's all that matters now. Besides, with no one left to cover up the prince's failures, the sweet karma is bound to catch up with him soon. That gives Ornest an idea, and he tells Alec they should focus on becoming the greatest adventuring party the world's ever seen. And once the rumors reach the capital, the prince will realize what he threw away, and when that day comes, Alec will be able to look him straight in the face and tell him off however he likes. Alec admits he likes the sound of that, and they fist bump, vowing that together they'll become the strongest party out there. At the same time, in another part of the guild, a badly injured adventurer from an S-rank party is being patched up while reporting to the guild master about her latest mission. Her name is Krista, and the mission had gone completely off the rails. Everything fell apart, and her teammates are still trapped deep inside the dungeon. So she pleads with Leviel to assemble a team to rescue them. Leviel immediately calls for an emergency meeting, but with such short notice, the only adventurers available are the ones already present at the guild. He informs the gathered group that they'll be forming a rescue squad to retrieve the rest of Krista's party, currently stranded on the 64th floor of the dungeon. Tension fills the room as everyone exchanges uneasy glances, because they all know how risky that floor is. While the meeting is in full swing, Alec is still sitting alone back in Leviel's office. That's where Kraja finds him, surprised to see him by himself. She greets him warmly and asks how he's holding up, but judging by the bruises and cuts all over his body, the answer is obvious. She asks why he isn't in the meeting, and Alec quietly says he didn't want to intrude. Everyone else attending is a rank, and he still doesn't feel like he belongs among them. Without saying a word, Kraja raises her hand and casts a healing spell, restoring Alec's injuries. Then she looks at him and gently reminds him that no one in this guild sees him as an outsider. While he worked at the royal court, Alec had gotten used to blending into the background, never speaking up, never standing out for fear of offending arrogant nobles. And even now, he struggles to shake off those habits. Even if things are different here, Kraja sees the weight he's carrying, so she reaches out and softly pats his head, telling him she's always around if he needs someone to talk to, and the gesture lifts his spirits more than he expected. Moments later, Ornest and Yorha return. Ornest looks fired up as he tells Alec they've just been handed the perfect opportunity to explore the dungeon. He fills him in on the rescue mission and adds that the area they're heading to is nicknamed the Tank Killer, and the reason is that healing magic is completely nullified inside. The only way to recover is with potions, which means survival is much harder. Alec is surprised Kraja agreed to a mission like this, considering how much she relies on healing spells, but she admits she's not exactly thrilled about it. In fact, she hates everything about that place. She only gave in because Ornest wouldn't stop insisting that it'd be the perfect first mission for the new team. Alec starts to doubt whether he's even strong enough to help, but Yorha shuts that down immediately. She tells him that he's the key to the entire operation. His magic is what their strategy depends on. one, and without him, they wouldn't stand a chance. The group soon heads toward the dungeon, and as they stop in front of its towering gate, Ornus steps forward with his usual swagger, declaring that this is where their legend begins. Then they begin mapping out their next moves. This particular dungeon is wrapped in a rare magical aura that completely disables healing spells. That means no recovery magic once they're inside, so only potions and raw agility will keep them alive against whatever comes their way. Their objective lies far below, close to the 64th floor, where members of Krista's guild are currently trapped. But getting there won't be simple, so they'll have to carve their way through every floor before it, including all the boss fights guarding each level. Ornus quickly assesses the situation and notes that if they go floor by floor, they'll arrive far too late. That's when Yorha pulls out a gleaming magic crystal, revealing that Krista had given it to them in advance. And with this item, they can bypass all previous levels and teleport straight to level 64. Alec instantly recognizes that this must be an exceptionally rare and powerful artifact, so Yorha says that Krista didn't hesitate to hand them out because her only priority is rescuing her teammates, no matter the cost. Yorha then adds that the level 64 boss is reportedly an undead, which unfortunately renders Kreja's light-based healing magic ineffective. And since Yorha herself is a support mage, the bulk of the fight will rest on Alec's shoulders. Ornus then tells Alec to conserve as much mana as possible, offering to handle the lesser enemies so Alec doesn't burn through his energy before reaching the real threat. Kreja agrees, urging the group to brace themselves, warning that from this point on, they'll be battling death itself. Even a season's rank party was completely wiped out in this place. Instead of being intimidated, Ornus grins with wild energy, more alive than ever. He rallies the group, shouting that this is where the tale of their legendary party truly begins. With that, Yorha tosses the crystal high into the air. As it shatters, it activates, instantly teleporting them deep into the dungeon, right to level 64. The group materializes in a dim, musty cavern, and within moments, a wave of undead skeletons begins to rise, armed with swords and shields. But Ornus doesn't hesitate for a second, and he draws his spear and charges head-on, striking the first wave with ruthless precision. With each thrust and sweep, he dismantles groups of undead effortlessly, boasting that level 64 seems laughably easy so far. The rest of the team stays back for a moment, quietly observing, as more skeletons crawl out from the shadows and begin advancing. Ornus, unfazed, continues his rampage, slashing down anything that moves. But Yorha quickly becomes concerned because he's moved too far away from her area of effect, so she breaks into a sprint, calling out for him to return to formation. Alec and Kreja follow closely, both muttering that Ornus will probably be fine. After all, he's armed with a legendary artifact, the piercing black spear. It's nearly indestructible, always razor sharp, and extremely effective in battle. So it's a perfect weapon for someone who fights with guts instead of brains. Alec calls out to Ornus, asking if he needs a hand, but Ornus confidently replies that this is child's play for him and continues demolishing every enemy that dares to come near. Alec chuckles and keeps walking alongside Kreja, when all of a sudden he senses something unusual behind him. Trusting his instincts, he fires off a lightning bolt over his shoulder. As the smoke clears, there's nothing in sight. Even Kreja looks puzzled, asking what that was about. Alec admits he thought someone was behind him, but maybe it was just a false alarm. Still uneasy, he draws his sword and dashes forward, slashing the air in front of him. His blade clashes with something invisible, which suddenly reveals itself as the Grim Reaper. Ornus grins and comments that Alec's not as out of shape as he assumed, adding that he sensed the invisible enemy earlier but couldn't deal with it himself. The Grim Reaper retaliates, pushing Alec back with a strike, but Alec quickly recovers, deflects the blow, and retreats toward Ornus. At that moment, Alec understands that Ornus was placing complete trust in him, counting on him to handle threats from behind without needing to look back. It's a feeling Alec hasn't experienced in years, true camaraderie, and that realization ignites a surge of strength within him. He leaps into the air, brandishing his enchanted sword, and delivers a clean, powerful strike that cuts through the Grim Reaper, slaying it instantly. He then turns toward Yorha and asks if she had known about it too. She immediately apologizes for keeping it quiet, while Kreja jokingly tells him to blame Ornus, since it was his idea in the first place. Alec smirks and tells Ornus he owes him one, to which Ornus replies that they'll talk about favors after they actually make it out of this dungeon alive. The four teammates now regroup, side by side, ready to take on whatever comes next. Soon after, both Alec and Ornest launch themselves into the swarm of undead, slicing and tearing through skeletons in every direction, while Yorha provides magical reinforcement from the rear. Ornest is in his element, pulling off flashy maneuvers and eliminating every skeleton in his path. Meanwhile, Kreja calmly supports him from a distance, taking down sneaky enemies with her deadly accurate bow shots whenever they try to flank him. Yorha, though typically in the backline, is forced to defend herself up close with her staff as the endless wave of skeletons pours in. Realizing the horde isn't slowing down, Alec calls the others back, shouting that he'll take care of the rest in one strike. Without hesitation, the party quickly gathers behind him, so Alec channels his power and unleashes a massive thunderbolt, engulfing the entire area in blinding electricity, making every last skeleton reduced to smoldering ash. Once they're in the clear, Ornest turns to Alec and casually asks why he's only been using his Thunderbolt skill, since back at the academy he used to wield several types of offensive magic. Alec quickly brushes it off and just says that Thunderbolt is the fastest spell to cast, so it's just more efficient in battle. Ornest raises an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced, but chooses not to push the issue as there's no time to dig deeper because they're on a mission. Suddenly, a monstrous roar echoes from the depths ahead, and they all instinctively assume it must be coming from the boss room. Ornest doesn't hesitate because the moment Yorha casts reinforcement magic, he blasts forward like a flash, running faster than Ishospeed himself. Alec watches in surprise, impressed by both Ornest's explosive speed and Yorha's magic boost. He and the girls waste no time and quickly follow Ornest through the tunnel toward the source of the noise. As they emerge into a wide open chamber, they spot Ornest perched casually on a rocky ledge, arms folded, observing a chaotic scene unfold below as a massive monster is chasing a panicked adventurer in every direction. Alec immediately prepares to help the poor guy, but Ornest doesn't move, muttering that the frantic mage down there is named Loki, a notorious troublemaker from a party called Recroma. Kraja nods in agreement, adding that Loki might be obnoxious, but he's also a clever support mage. Alec, however, struggles to process what he's hearing, especially as Loki flails around, screaming up at Ornest to do something and swearing he'll haunt him every day if he dies here. Ornest, unfazed by the threats, just watches with a bored expression. But the situation looks grim because Loki suddenly trips and crashes to the ground, with the monster bearing down on him fast. Alec instinctively gets ready to intervene, but Kraja tells him to wait, explaining that this is all part of Loki's usual strategy. Alec hesitates, watching as the towering monster approaches Loki. But then, in a flash, a trap spell beneath the creature ignites, blasting it with molten lava. Alec's eyes widen in shock, but Kraja simply smirks, repeating that Loki is nothing if not crafty. The beast staggers backward, only to trigger another trap, setting off a chain of fiery explosions. Loki jumps to his feet and starts taunting the creature, laughing mockingly and boasting that only a fool would trip in a trap-filled zone like this. But his arrogance quickly backfires as the monster roars in rage and charges up a devastating magical blast aimed directly at him. Loki's bravado fades in an instant as he realizes that death is seconds away. So he closes his eyes, bracing for the end, but is saved at the very last moment by none other than Ornest, and Loki can't believe he's still breathing. Then, as Alec and the girls make their descent to join the battle, the monster redirects its fury, launching an attack straight at Alec. But Yorha reacts in time, casting a protective shield that blocks the strike. Alec prepared to counter with another thunder magic, but before he could unleash it, the beast twisted around and charged straight for Ornest and Loki instead. Alec shouts a warning to Ornest and Loki, alerting them to the incoming danger, and fires off another thunderbolt spell that strikes the monster dead on. However, as the dust settles, he quickly realizes the attack wasn't powerful enough to bring it down. Ornest notices the creature rapidly closing in on him, so he resorts to a desperate maneuver, charging straight at the beast and slipping between its legs in a swift motion. He then hurls Loki toward Kraja, who tumbles to the ground beside him. Yorha promptly instructs Kraja to take Loki to the ledge while they handle the monster. Ornest swiftly assumes position, drawing his spear in preparation for the next clash. They wait until Kraja secures Loki's safety, then brace themselves for the final confrontation. Yorha casts a powerful enhancement spell, boosting all of Ornest's stats, prompting him to charge the creature head-on. He skillfully evades its strike, leaps into the air, and drives his spear toward its face. Yet the monster proves far more resilient than expected, violently shaking him off and flinging him to the ground. Yorha races to aid the fallen Ornest, but the monster attempts to crush him instantly. Fortunately, she casts her shield spell just in time to block the blow, giving Ornest a brief moment to recover. Meanwhile, Alec appears almost theatrical, conducting an unseen symphony as he summons 5 glowing magic circles around the monster. Loki observes in disbelief, remarking that even generating 3 circles is incredibly difficult. For Alec to conjure 5 simultaneously, he must be a prodigy, but Kraja calmly replies that Alec is capable of far more. To Loki's astonishment, Alec proceeds to summon 20 magical circles at once. Then, as the monster lunges forward, Ornest climbs up its body and strikes its tail, buying Alec the precious seconds needed to complete his spell. Ornest then leaps away just as Alec finishes his incantation and unleashes a devastating barrage of thunderbolt magic that electrocutes the beast, freezing it mid-motion. But when Alec moves in to deliver the final blow, the creature unexpectedly sidesteps, narrowly evading the attack. The monster immediately begins charging its own magical blast, but Kraja quickly casts a blinding spell, momentarily disorienting it. At the same time, Yorha uses her magic to summon enormous glowing chains that bind the monster tightly in place. Taking full advantage of the moment, Ornest hurls his spear like a javelin, landing a direct hit through the creature's skull as Alec prepares to finish it for good. But to everyone's surprise, the monster still manages to move and immediately begins casting its devastating magical blast once more. Alec, however, remains calm and unmoved, preparing to unleash a spell so rare that only 2 people in the world even know it. One is his mentor Eldas, the very mage who created it, and the other is Alec himself, who learned it directly under his guidance. As the creature hurls its charged blast toward Alec, he counters it with reflection magic, sending the attack back with twice the force. But the Dame monster is incredibly resilient and somehow survives even that. Now barely hanging on, the beast attempts the same spell again. But this time Alec combines his reflection magic with multiple layered magic circles, engulfing the monster in a brutal inferno. The beast is incinerated where it stands, and Ornest follows up by slicing its head clean in half, bringing the battle to an end. With the fight over, the group begins to celebrate their hard-won victory. But their moment is cut short when Loki steps forward, thanking Alec for his help and revealing that he knows who he is, specifically, that Alec is the court magician. Alec casually replies that he's no longer with the royal court, to which Loki responds that it's the prince and his party's loss. He then drops a bombshell. The monster they just defeated wasn't even the floor boss. It was merely one of the sub-bosses that had foolishly chased after him and ended up separated from the rest. This revelation stuns Alec and the others, who now question how powerful the real boss must be if even a sub-boss pushed them to their limits. Loki then reveals that the true floor boss is a necromancer clad in pitch-black armor, masquerading as a knight. He warns that regular physical attacks don't do much damage and are mostly useful for stalling. Turning toward Alec, Loki presents him with a magical wand topped with a silver cross. Alec instantly recognizes the relic as Loki reveals it to be a long-lost ancient artifact. As soon as Alec grips it, the wand transforms into a gleaming sword in his hand. Ornest is skeptical and questions Loki's motive for giving away something so valuable. Loki just chuckles and admits he plans to use Alec as bait on the front lines. The entire group stares at him in disbelief, unsure if he's joking. But Loki explains that Alec, with his frail appearance, would look like an easy target. By placing him at the vanguard, they could lure the boss in, catch it off guard, and then spring a coordinated ambush, securing victory and earning the glory of slaying an S-ranked boss. At the same time, the prince and his team find themselves fleeing through the depths of another dungeon by 2 enormous caterpillars. The prince is completely thrown off by the situation, unable to grasp how things have spiraled so far out of control, especially given that he's never had any trouble handling these types of creatures in the past. Without hesitation, he orders Lenny to destroy them using magic. She makes the attempt, but for reasons she can't explain, her spells simply refuse to activate. Irritated, the prince lashes out, calling her useless and insisting that he'll take care of the threat personally. However, the moment he swings his blade, it bounces harmlessly off the monster's hide. And it's in that exact moment he starts to realize that something is very wrong, and he takes a hit. Lenny and Ix quickly pull the prince up from the ground after he's knocked down and make a run for the dungeon exit. During their retreat, the prince racks his brain, trying to make sense of what went wrong. His attacks used to carry far more force, and now that he reflects on it, He realizes that his decline in strength began right after he removed Alec from the group. But rather than acknowledging that Alec may have been a valuable asset, the prince convinces himself that Alec must have cursed him out of spite. Once they've made it out of the dungeon, the prince immediately visits one of the royal magicians, Vogan Fornius, to investigate whether he's under the influence of a curse. After conducting a brief magical analysis, Vogan confirms that no such curse exists. The prince is stunned, insisting that he wouldn't have had such trouble clearing the 30th floor unless Alec had sabotaged him. But Vogan, aware of the anti-magic zone present on that floor, calmly explains that the prince likely felt weaker because his support magic was being suppressed. The prince scoffs at the explanation, dismissing support magic as worthless trash that only weaklings like Alec depend on. Vogan does his best to remain professional, even as the prince continues rambling with baseless arrogance. Still, he does find it unusual that Alec hadn't warned the prince about the anti-magic field beforehand, considering Alec is the famed student who once reached the 68th floor. The prince laughs dismissively, telling Vogan that there's no chance someone as pathetic as Alec could have actually accomplished such a feat, and claims it must be just some rumor that commoners circulate among themselves. Vogan doesn't even attempt to argue because there's simply no reasoning with that level of delusion. But at that moment, a royal guard steps into the room and informs the prince that the king wishes to speak with him regarding Alec's situation. The prince grins, confident that his father will support him. However, upon his arrival, the king immediately begins recounting a story about Eldaz. He explains that Eldaz was once a royal magician who had been exiled years ago, and in the king's words, was a remarkable fool. Eldaz, despite being a noble, had the audacity to stand before the king of Galdana and declare that unless the treatment of commoners and court magicians changed, a great tragedy would befall the nation. The prince interrupts, claiming Eldaz deserved to be banished since no nobleman should dare speak to the king in such a bold tone. But the king clarifies that Eldaz wasn't called a fool for his words. After being stripped of his noble rank and cast out, Eldaz went on to enroll at the Royal Magic Academy. There he silenced his critics with extraordinary talent and graduated as valedictorian. Yet despite gaining fame and prestige, he made the baffling decision to return to the castle and serve once again as a court magician. While in service, he persisted in telling the king that commoners were not beneath them, urging him to change his views, until one day Eldaz mysteriously vanished. At the time, the king had dismissed Eldaz's warnings, but recently he's begun to reflect on whether the man may have been right. That doubt is precisely why he ordered the prince to explore the dungeon, because he wanted to determine whether nobility truly makes one superior to commoners, and based on the prince's current state, the king admits he may have been mistaken. He states that the time has come to abolish their outdated policy of discrimination, and going forward he intends to hire based on talent, regardless of lineage. The prince is left speechless, shocked by what he's hearing, and insists that such a policy would tarnish the royal family's reputation if commoners were treated as equals. The king calmly acknowledges that he's the one who raised the prince with those beliefs. But times have changed, and so must they. The prince protests, arguing that associating with commoners like Alec only brings disaster, pointing to his own situation as evidence. But before he can continue, a guard steps forward and hands Regulus the remains of a torn note that Alec had written. The king explains that before Alec departed, he had prepared a detailed guide specifically designed to help Regulus navigate the 30th floor of the dungeon. But it was destroyed by Lenny before the prince ever had a chance to read it. Regulus is stunned by the revelation, and overwhelmed he quietly tells his father that he's not feeling well and excuses himself from the room. As Regulus exits the chamber, the king turns to Vogan and quietly requests that despite the challenges it may present, he would be grateful if Vogan could support Regulus to the best of his ability. Vogan nods and assures the king that he will do everything in his power. At the same time, Regulus is spiraling into a mental breakdown, because if Alec truly possessed remarkable talent and insight all along, then the harsh truth is that he himself may have been the problem, and he simply cannot accept that reality. At the same time, on Alec's side, he is in the midst of asking Loki to explain why he doesn't want him using magic against the upcoming boss. Alec understands that artifacts carry immense power, but this particular boss is supposed to be immune to physical attacks, and he doesn't believe the sword alone will be effective. However, Loki clarifies that he never intended for Alec to actually defeat it with the sword. He just wants Alec to act like a close-range fighter to prevent the boss from anticipating a magical attack. The rest of the group catches on to the strategy. but Kraja remains confused as to why they need to deceive the monster in the first place. Loki then explains that this boss possesses intelligence equal to their own. Alec finds the claim hard to accept, and Loki understands the skepticism. Still, all he asks is for Alec to rely on his blade, at least until he gives the signal, and Alec ultimately agrees to follow the plan. With that settled, Loki turns to Kraja and says there's something he needs her assistance with. It would take too long to reach their allies on foot, so he intends to use teleportation magic. The only issue is that he doesn't currently have enough mana to cast the spell by himself, so he requests her support in completing the ritual. The group immediately panics upon hearing the words teleportation magic, since it's a closely guarded national secret, and even being aware of it could put them at serious risk. But given the circumstances, they decide to take the gamble, while jokingly agreeing that if it all goes wrong, they'll just blame Loki. As Loki begins drawing the teleportation circle and walking Kraja through the process, Alec takes a moment to pull Yorha aside and asks whether Loki is someone he can truly trust. Yorha admits that she personally doesn't care for Loki's attitude, but when it comes to serious matters, he's absolutely dependable. To back that up, she tells Alec that 2 years ago, Loki successfully led a large-scale raid on a high-tier dungeon, and due to his exceptional planning, the entire mission was completed without a single casualty. Hearing this, Alec decides to put his full confidence in Loki's strategy, and once the teleportation circle is finished, the group gathers together inside it. Yorha is in awe, witnessing real teleportation magic for the very first time. However, Loki informs her that this is merely a simplified variant, designed to transport them to a destination of his choosing. On that note, he gives the group a firm warning. They'll be arriving directly in front of the boss, so they need to be battle-ready the moment they arrive. With that, Loki activates the teleportation circle, and in the blink of an eye, they vanish from their location and reappear right in front of the other members of Loki's team, who are currently locked in combat with the Dark Knight. The two allies have done their best to hold the creature off, but despite their efforts, they've inflicted little damage and are now visibly running out of stamina. Luckily, Ornist rushes in just in time to cover their retreat. He engages the Knight head-on, drawing its attention, and while the Knight focuses on Ornist, Alec tries to land a sneak attack from behind, but the enemy reacts instantly, leaping into the air to avoid the strike. The Knight then charges at both Alec and Ornist, while Loki and Kraja move quickly to assist Reuel and Marbel, helping them retreat to safety. The Knight's armor is incredibly dense, and from what they can tell, there's no actual body inside it. But that makes no difference to Ornist, because he rushes forward again, striking at the Knight. The enemy attempts to jump over him, but Ornist was ready for that and pinned the Knight's cape with his spear into the ground, creating a perfect opening for Alec to sever the Knight's head. As the heavy steel helmet crashes to the floor, Alec wonders if that was enough to finish it off. But in battles like this, things are never that simple. The Knight suddenly begins to stir once more, and grotesque tendrils burst out of its now exposed neck. So it becomes clear that this is an undead headless horseman, and the creature they had slain earlier must have been its mount. For a brief moment, Alec gets caught up in his thoughts, and by the time he snaps back to reality, the Dullahan is already airborne and descending toward him with a powerful attack. Alec raises his sword in a panic to block the blow, and barely manages to withstand it. The monster is faster and stronger than before, confirming Alec's suspicion that it had been holding back earlier. So from this point forward, the fight is only going to become more intense. But luckily, he doesn't have to face it alone. While Alec is holding his ground, Yorha is continuously casting buffs on Ornist, and once he's fully charged, Ornist launches himself forward and lands a brutal hit on the Knight, giving Alec just enough of an opening to knock the creature back. Alec is stunned by how resilient the Knight's armor is, because if his weapon weren't a powerful artifact, it would have shattered long ago under the pressure of such fierce blows. Even worse, the fact that their opponent is undead means that no matter how many times they manage to knock it down, it will always regenerate and rise again. And speaking of which, the Knight suddenly retrieves its severed head and reattaches it to its shoulders before unleashing a deafening shriek that rattles the entire battlefield, leaving everyone momentarily disoriented. Immediately after, it locks onto Alec and delivers a brutal kick with all its force, launching him backward at an alarming speed. Fortunately, just before he slams into the wall, Yorha casts a barrier spell that cushions the impact. She rushes over to check on him, and Alec reassures her that he's okay. He just hadn't anticipated the Knight having such refined martial prowess, and if not for Yorha's quick reaction with a barrier, there's a real chance he wouldn't have survived that blow. With that in mind, he turns to Loki and asks how much longer he has to keep fighting using only the sword. Loki, still in the midst of completing his preparations, tells Alec that he needs to hold out for 5 more minutes. Easier said than done because Alec almost died a moment ago, and he's down to just 3 potions. Meanwhile, Ornest is struggling to stay on his feet, shouting for Alec to get his ass back into the fight. Together, the two press on, doing their best to keep the knight engaged until Loki's 5-minute countdown is finally up. With his setup complete, Loki activates a massive magic circle and begins laughing, drawing everyone's attention. The display provokes the knight into a panic, so it charges straight at Loki and slashes him across the chest. But that, as it turns out, was all according to plan, because the Loki it struck was nothing more than an illusion, and the grand spell circle was simply a decoy designed to lure the enemy into a carefully laid trap. In that instant, ice begins to crystallize beneath the knight's feet, while the real Loki observes from the top of a nearby tower. At the same time, Ornest triggers a teleportation trap, crafted earlier by Loki and Kraja, that instantly moves him behind the knight, giving him the opportunity to strike and push it forward. Just then, Marbell leaps down from an overhead arch, aiming a heavy downward slash. The knight narrowly dodges the blow, but this too was anticipated. Loki had placed another hidden ice trap that activates on contact, weakening the knight's movement speed with a freezing debuff. Realizing Loki is the mastermind behind the battlefield manipulation, the knight begins scaling the tower to eliminate him directly. Loki draws a magic blade to defend himself, but Reuel is visibly concerned because Loki doesn't have the raw power to stand toe-to-toe with the knight. Although he had Yorha apply a 7-fold strength amplification earlier, the strain on his body is immense, and he's barely holding it together. Still, while Loki holds the knight's attention, Yorha prepares and casts a high-tier binding spell to restrain it. The spell succeeds, but not before the knight lands a heavy strike on Loki, knocking him off the edge of the arch and sending him plummeting toward the ground. Yet, even in freefall, Loki remains calm and unfazed because everything is proceeding exactly as he envisioned. And as he falls, he looks over to Alec, and with a smirk, calls out that the stage has been set, and it's time to bring this battle to an end, and he happily agrees. That concludes this episode. Thank you for watching. If you want to see the next part, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell.